Over 70% of the world's surface is completely covered by bodies of water, oceans, lakes, rivers, and they're not just pretty to look at. They hold all sorts of mysteries no one's ever seen before. And when these areas are drained out, for whatever reason, you'd be shocked to see what's actually down there. On that note, here are some of the strangest things found in drained water bodies. Number 24, Italian Town. It's not only the United States that has sunk entire towns in the past. Countries like Italy have done it as well. This particular village was flooded because of a dam. It's a classic reason to flood an area. As has been made clear, when they had to repair the dam and drain the nearby reservoir, the town re-emerged and became an instant tourist destination. It also became more than that. Netflix heard about the place, and they had one of their shows set there, released in 2020. Back in 1950, Curon was a bustling village until it was flooded to create a hydroelectric plant. Fast forward 71 years, and repairs to the dam forced a team to drain the lake temporarily. As the water receded, the forgotten village slowly emerged. The entire area was flooded to create a reservoir for a hydroelectric power plant. More than 160 homes had to be blown up and flooded, forcing the villagers to move out. Sadly, the place had to go like that, but at least it got to see the light of day again. Seems like draining bodies of water is kind of a trend in Europe, because the same happened in France. Number 23, Canal St Martin. In certain cities like Paris, there aren't only standard bodies of water. There are canals and places throughout the city that help separate the various districts. This means you can tell where you are by the waterway nearby. In this case, Canal St Martin is one of the most prominent water bodies in Paris, which is one of the city's wealthiest areas. But it doesn't get cleaned out very often, so when they decided to tidy it up in 2016, after 15 years, they found all sorts of garbage left behind by locals and tourists alike. You might be surprised at some of the junk discovered there. Take bikes, for example. You might think it's no big deal if one falls in, but they found 100 of them just hanging out in the water. Yeah, dozens of tourist bikes, all abandoned like it's nothing. They also found various cameras and other items typically associated with tourists, showing that they likely got too close to the canal and things went south quickly. The locals aren't blameless either. The canal is right next to a popular nightlife district, and when drinking is involved, anything can happen. It's not just bikes, though. People have found even crazier things in the past. Number 22, cars with bodies. Back in 2013, something very shocking happened in Oklahoma when a lake started to dry up. They discovered two cars, a rusty 1952 Chevrolet and a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro that had 6 bodies inside, all tied to old cold cases that had been unsolved for years. The problem was that nobody could find the bodies or any clues to help with the investigations. So did the lake just reveal these bodies? Well, not quite. Local police were actually testing out some sonar equipment when they stumbled upon the cars. Once they pulled the vehicles out, they found out that the bodies inside belonged to 2 different groups of people who had gone missing decades apart. One group was a set of teenagers who had gone missing in the 1970s, while the other was an elderly man and his friends who had vanished in the 50s or 60s. Needless to say, the officers were baffled that all these people were in the lake the entire time. It's easy to understand why. Investigators think one car might belong to a teenager named Jimmy Williams, who went missing in 1970 with 2 friends, Thomas Rios and Leah Johnson. They went missing after taking a drive in the Camaro on November 20th, 1970, and were supposed to be heading to a football game, but might have gone hunting instead. The car was never found, and Jimmy's social security number has never been used. The other car could be connected to a man who vanished in the 60s. After all, how did both vehicles get into the lake without anyone finding a trace of them for 40 or more years? It's crazy to think that the only reason they found them was because they were doing some random testing on the lake itself. They weren't even trying to find the cars. Missing people is one thing, but some people even hide stuff in the water. Number 21. Crime weapons. Believe it or not, a lot of people try to get rid of weapons by tossing them into lakes, ponds, rivers, or oceans. It makes sense. If the water is deep enough, no one is likely to go searching for them. And if they do, they'll need a ton of resources to find everything. In Tempe, Arizona, when the local area drained the lake, they found multiple pistols and even a knife that were believed to be linked to crimes. One of the weapons was reported stolen from a nearby town, proving at least one incident happened. The lake was emptied to complete construction on a new hydraulic-operated steel gate dam that replaced an inflatable rubber system. If the area hadn't needed to do that, those weapons might have never been discovered. Weapons and towns aren't the only thing found after draining these bodies of water, sometimes even ancient treasures. Number 20. 1,000 lingers. This discovery takes us to the east, on the banks of the Shalmala River in the Indian state of Karnataka. Only visible during the dry season or when the water levels have receded because of overconsumption, this discovery was first recorded in 1969 by ethologist John Bulbe and gives us some insight into ancient cultures. Often confused for male and female sex organs, a linga is a smooth, phallus-like, cylindrical mass, symbolizing Shiva, resting at the center of a rimmed, disc-shaped structure. Lingas are powerful Hindu symbols that represent the energy and potential of God Shiva. The construction of these 1,000 lingams was commissioned by King Sadashi Raga, also known as the King of Sirsi of the Vijayanagar Kingdom, who reigned from 1678 to 1718. So yes, they are ancient. He commissioned the building of these stones to appease the god Shiva to grant him an heir. These lingams are in Sahasralinga in Sirsi Tuluk, which is a pilgrimage place. It's also no surprise that Sahasralinga means 1,000 lingams. Number 19. Lost gold era towns and mineral deposits. The 19th century was the golden era. The gold rush led to hordes of people relocating to California and forming mining settlements. Since these settlements were located near rivers, most have since been submerged with the development of reservoirs. Even though droughts in California can be tough, they show us what's been hiding on the lake beds. One of the biggest discoveries was a Mormon island, a town started by Mormon prospectors back in the 1840s, right in Folsom Lake near Sacramento. This place has been underwater since 1955 when they finished the Folsom Dam. At its height, Mormon Island had around 2,500 people living there. They had a school, a bunch of saloons, and even 4 hotels. You can still spot some of the old building foundations poking out of the ground today. Another find was the old Kernville. Founded in 1860 by gold prospectors, it was flooded after the creation of Isabella Dam and was discovered after the water level dropped to only 5.8% of the lake's capacity. Foundations of a school, jail, a general store, and a Methodist church are still visible. The water levels in these lakes have also brought hope to modern-day gold prospectors. Why? Well, previously inaccessible gold deposits are now reachable. Like this one Cal State University student made $900 from a stream that had been inaccessible before the drought. You also couldn't go to this fort before this drought took over. Number 18. Fort Moki. After more than 40 years, Lake Powell finally let in on her secrets in 2005 thanks to a 7-year drought. This next find has been around for more than 750 years. Fort Moki is an ancient Anasazi Indian fortress that has been buried under Lake Powell since it first filled up. For hundreds of years, Fort Moki sat in Glen Canyon undisturbed and was a key attraction for anyone who dared venture into the canyon. It has now come to be termed a ruin of a ruin, as only a few feet of the initial 12-foot-high walls are still remaining. The walls of the ruins held invaluable secrets as hundreds had inscribed their names, including members of the John Wesley Powell River Expedition in 1869. When the Glen Canyon Dam was constructed in 1956, it resulted in the formation of Lake Powell, which swallowed Fort Moki in 1969. The fort has been underwater ever since, but back in 2005, the lake receded by more than 100 feet, a new low since the construction of the dam that saved the fort from its watery ordeal, though only for a short while. Drought also led to the discovery of creatures living underwater that no one knew about. Number 17. Underwater creatures. Large water areas contain a great deal of creatures, and this next discovery goes to support this claim. Apparently, freshwater jellyfish are now a thing in California's lakes, thanks again to the drought that saw the lake levels drop to a new low. These jellyfish appearances are sporadic and are only visible during drought years. It's also a good thing they aren't dangerous, as their sting can't penetrate human skin. Despite these fish being tiny, some pretty big catches have been fished out of the Phoenix North Canal in an exercise to clean up the canal between 43rd and 75th Avenue. One such catch is a 32-pound catfish that was 32 inches long. It is estimated that there are over 200,000 fish in the canal, and they are pretty important. The fish eat up the vegetation in the canal that would otherwise overwhelm cleaning crews. The fish rounded up in the canal were relocated to 35th Avenue. Creatures underwater isn't that surprising, but literal forests isn't something you'd expect. Number 16. Train trestle and underwater forest. These first discoveries were made in Lake Tapps in Washington state near Seattle. The train trestle dates back to the turn of the 20th century, and alongside the forest, they were submerged when a dam was built in 1911 and have been underwater ever since. The dam was constructed by Puget Sound Energy Company to produce hydroelectric power, but stopped operations in 2009. This discovery would not have been made were it not for a crack that developed on the dam, which led to the dam being drained for repairs. When they drained the dam, they found a trestle and a forest. It was totally surprising to see the forest in such great shape after being underwater for over 100 years. Originally part of the land, the forest ended up submerged when the lake filled up and covered everything else. Once the lake started filling up, it was submerged along with pretty much everything else. Along with forests, people have also discovered beaches underwater. Number 15. Bombay Beach Town. Once known as California's Riviera, Bombay Beach has been underwater in the Salton Sea for over 40 years. To get the story of Bombay Beach, you need to know how the Salton Sea came to be. Back in 1905, the Colorado River flooded the Salton Sink, and it kept going for 2 years, turning into a massive lake about 15 by 35 miles long. Birds loved it, and fish thrived. Developers jumped on the chance, and Bombay Beach popped up. As time went on, chemicals from nearby farms started to build up in the lake. The levels got really high and birds began to die. With not enough oxygen in the water, the fish suffocated, and their rotting bodies washed up on the shores, leaving the beaches covered in fish skeletons. To top it all off, the lake overflowed and flooded the lower part of the town. But thanks to a big drought in 2014, trailers and houses that had been hidden underwater are now popping back up for everyone to see. It's true that a lot of the stuff found in lakes and rivers is discovered by accident, but some people actually go out searching for treasures. Number 14. The Family Artifact. This adventurer had been on a mission for nearly 20 years to find a piece of history that's been sitting at the bottom of a nearby lake. Specifically, he was looking for what was known as a steam shovel. This fascinating piece of engineering was used to help make the nearby Eden Dam, which led to the creation of the lake. Back in 1975, he and his 2 sons thought they had found a key part of it, but they couldn't locate the rest. Fast forward to the year 2020, when he and his brother were finally able to find the full-steam shovel, completing the journey their father had set out on so long ago. Sadly, much like with Ukraine, the reason the water had drained was that the dam had broken, causing a lot of damage when the water spilled out into the nearby area. Yet, the two brothers couldn't deny that it was nice to finally find what their father had been searching for all those years. This wasn't the only shocking discovery made in a river. Number 13. Yangtze River statues. Rivers can change their water levels super quickly, which makes living near one a bit risky, especially with the chance of flooding. In China, the Yangtze River is a major waterway, so when it gets affected by nature, everyone feels it. In 2022, that's exactly what happened, when the river levels dropped so low that it exposed a literal island inside the river. That island had a set of Buddha statues on it. No one saw that one coming. The statues themselves were thought to be around 600 years old, which would mean that once upon a time, the river was consistently low enough to allow these carefully crafted constructs to remain visible without the fear of being lost. Seems like it's common to find statues underwater because the same happened in Annor. Number 12. Saras Sarang Reservoir statues. Annor was one of the biggest ancient cities in Cambodia back in the day. When it got lost, a lot of people set out to find it. They started a huge excavation project that's still going on today. So in 2020, when they drained the reservoir, they definitely didn't expect to find a statue of a sea turtle. While that might sound a little weird, it actually makes a lot of sense. In the local culture, this turtle is one of the creatures associated with one of their gods named Vishnu, one of the key Hindu gods that they worship. And it wasn't only in the water, it was actually beneath where the temple was. The reasoning for this is that the ancient people believed that if they buried a statue like this under the place, it would ensure stability and strong foundations through the blessing from the gods. Ancient stuff is also being found all over America from under the water, specifically Detroit. Number 11. Old Detroit. When you think of Detroit, Michigan, you probably picture it as the Motor City, right? But it also used to be a symbol of the American dream for a lot of people. Nowadays, though, it's struggling with poverty and decay. Many corporations took advantage of the city and its residents, leaving them with few options to improve their lives. While the old charm of Detroit might seem lost, you can still find bits and pieces of its past if you know where to look and the conditions are just right. Like at the Detroit Lake, you can see what used to be the original version of Detroit if the water is low enough. That happened in 2015 when the water level dropped over 40 feet, revealing the town that used to exist there. Before the Detroit we know now, there was Old Detroit, which housed a couple of hundred people before the construction of the Detroit Dam flooded the area. When a massive drought hit the city, it caused the water levels to drop significantly. A local deputy went treasure hunting and found items from the early 1900s, if not earlier, including an old wagon that had once been used to transport goods down the street. While Old Detroit is covered up once again, it's hardly the only city to have been flooded in such a manner. There are more remains waiting to be rediscovered when the waters drop low enough again. Old Detroit wasn't the only treasure found after water was drained from the area, so was this statue. Number 10. Buddha statue. Back in January 2017, a 600-year-old Buddha statue was found in a reservoir in Jiangxi province, eastern China, after the water levels dropped during some renovation work. A local villager spotted the Buddha's head sticking out last month when the water dropped by more than 10 meters while they were working on a hydropower gate. The head of the statue sits against a cliff, looking peacefully over the water. It's been attracting tons of tourists and locals who think it's a lucky sign. The statue seems to be in surprisingly good shape, probably because being submerged helped protect it from things like weathering and oxidation. It's about 12.5 feet tall and carved right into the cliff. Archaeologists believe this statue might date back to the Ming dynasty or even earlier, possibly to the Yuan dynasty. There's also a base of a temple hall that was found underwater, and local records say the reservoir is actually sitting on the ruins of an ancient town called Xiaoxi. An underwater archaeology team is checking out both the statue and the ancient town and working on a plan to preserve everything. This area is known for its Buddhist carvings, with the Lashan giant Buddha being the most famous. A local official mentioned that the statue was built by ancient people to protect the area where two rivers meet, helping to calm the strong currents. The statue was submerged back in 1960 when the Hongmen Reservoir was built, and at that time, local authorities didn't really think about heritage protection. On one hand, people find religion structures. On the other hand, you'll find all sorts of historical weapons. Number 9. World War II. Weapons. Now, you may be surprised at how many weapons of war end up in various bodies of water that don't reappear until you least expect them. There are lots of lakes, rivers, and oceans full of wreckage from the World War II because of the numerous locations where fighting took place. In 2023, with Ukraine still dealing with the ongoing conflict with Russia, a destroyed dam led to a reservoir getting drained. That was bad enough because of the dam's importance, but then they discovered weapons from World War II in the now drained body of water. So what kind of things did they find? During the war, Germany and Russia battled across Ukraine, so things like anti-aircraft guns, various forms of ammunition, and even explosive devices were littered across that reservoir. The craziest part was that the explosive stuff was still active even after all these years, which is why they had to conduct controlled explosions in a safe zone to ensure that nobody was hurt. The irony, of course, is that while they are finding remnants of past wars, they are still dealing with the fallout from a war that seems to never end in the present time. While there are many treasures underwater, the one thing found the most commonly is straight-up trash. Number 8. Waste. Our oceans are packed with all sorts of garbage and waste. There's even a huge island made of trash in the Pacific Ocean that keeps getting bigger every year. You might think pollution stops there, but it doesn't. Over the years, we've filled lakes and rivers with tons of junk, and it's high time we start cleaning it up. Back in 2021, Echo Park in Los Angeles was shut down specifically to clean out the lake. It was a good move because when the crews finished, they had removed over 35 tons of waste. But how could so much stuff be in there? It wasn't just one item. There were all kinds of things, from biological waste to drug paraphernalia. Documents from Lausanne show that the cleanup included 723.5 pounds of biological waste and 300 pounds of hazardous waste, like paint, sharp objects, and even drug stuff. The whole cleanup and repair project cost about $600,000, according to a report from the Board of Recreation and Park Commissioners before the park closed. You can see why the park had to be closed. If someone had jumped into the lake, they could have gotten really sick or worse. Plus, since it was a lake, it had nowhere to discharge all that waste. It was just sitting there. Well, sometimes when water gets drained, you can find literal pathways and tunnels no one ever knew existed. Number 7. Blenheim Palace Tunnels. Those who know British history know that Blenheim Palace has been a key location for many years. It was also the home of Winston Churchill once upon a time. However, there was one area of the palace that no one could go to. Specifically, there was a flooded area of the property that had been that way for 250 years. They eventually decided to pony up the pounds and get rid of the water to see what was there, and boy, are they glad that they did. That's because they found secret tunnels and rooms. They discovered all sorts of insights into the property's history, including engravings, graffiti, and even proof that there had been people living in those secret rooms in the 18th century. It just goes to show you that you never know what you're going to find until you flush some water out. This isn't the only historical site found underwater. There's also a Romanian town that had been undiscovered for centuries. Number 6. Roman Ghost Village. While it might sound a little creepy, this town has nothing to do with ghosts. It's actually filled with ancient Roman soldiers looking for revenge. It's just another town that was flooded long ago and then got to see the light of day once again. In this case, the ghost town was in Spain. It had flooded over 2,000 years ago thanks to a reservoir. Thanks to the long gap between its appearances, you can bet that a lot of people were stunned to discover they had such a historical area right next to them and never even knew about it. But what was this village? Well, reports would indicate that it was a kind of military training camp, which would make sense given the period that the village was active and the massive size of the Roman legions that were there. Speaking of creepy stuff, how can we forget about the Lake Mead remains? Number 5. The Lake Mead remains. You kind of have to know that something like this was coming. I mean, after all, if you could find cars full of bodies accidentally in a watery place, what's to stop someone from putting someone there intentionally? In Lake Mead, Nevada, the water levels dropped due to a massive drought. When they did, officers took a look at the bottom of the lake, and that's when they found a barrel. That barrel had human remains inside of it. Then they found even more remains later on after that. There were 2 bodies that were discovered only because the lake bed had dried up, which is pretty bad, and also shows just how far people are willing to go to get rid of evidence and make sure that nobody is ever found. This is exactly why you should go snooping around underwater either, even if it's in a submarine. Number 4. Submarine. It may not seem odd to find a submarine inside a body of water, but trust me, this one is special. This wasn't just some submarine, it was one of the first of its kind. In fact, it was called the Submarine Explorer, which was made by a German inventor. It was both hand-operated and capable of going 30 meters below the surface and then back up without any help from above. For the time, that was revolutionary, and it was eventually put to work near Panama. So why was it found many years later in a rust-filled state? Well, at the time, nobody knew about things like decompression sickness, so people on board the sub kept on dying, and it was simply abandoned. It's a key part of history, and it's good that it was found. A submarine might not sound as shocking to find as a literal rodent. Number 3. A giant rat. On September 18th, cleanup crews in Mexico City faced everyone's worst nightmare when they came across what looked like a monster rat while cleaning out the sewers. This rodent, which was about the size of a Buick, was part of a whopping 22 tons of trash that workers pulled out of the drainage tunnels after some heavy rains, according to the border report. As the workers went about their messy job, but when they turned a corner and saw what they thought was a giant rat. What made things even worse was that it had fur that looked super realistic. But the creature was actually a Halloween prop that had been washed out of its warehouse during the storm. Turns out this belonged to a woman named Evelyn Lopez, who made it from scratch for Halloween. She said it went missing years ago during a big rainstorm, and no one could help her find it. Thankfully, the giant rat is now back in safe hands. On one hand, you'll find trash like a giant rat. On the other, you might come across treasures like real diamond jewelry. Number 2. Wedding rings. This discovery involves a $320 ring that was found after 8 million gallons of water were drained from tidal marine lake. Matt Walker was enjoying a swim in the lake when the gold band slipped from his finger. Frantically, he tried to look for it in the murky waters, but to no avail. To aggravate the loss, it was only a few days until his 13th wedding anniversary. Despairing, he contacted the committee that maintains the lake in Clevedon, Somerset, whose officials informed him the lake would be drained 2 months later. It was definitely a light at the end of the tunnel situation. Armed with metal detectors, Matt and 5 volunteers from the Somerset Artifact Seekers descended into the lake once it was drained. After 2 hours of painstaking searching and dozens of bleeps that yielded nothing much but metallic junk, Dave Baker, one of the volunteers, finally found it. This was after he decided to look into the pontoon where Matt had climbed. Talk about finding a needle in a haystack. Unique jewelry isn't the only thing found after draining a lake. This agent also found his lost items. Number 1. Federal agent's gun and badge. Back in 2014, California faced one of the worst droughts it had experienced in nearly a century. This led to water levels in many lakes dropping to an all-time low. Though not that desirable, the drought made it possible for this discovery to be made in Lake Castaic. Back in 1992, an agent who now works for the ATF and a friend spent a day at Castaic Lake. Before he got into the boat, he put his police gear and valuables into a backpack that he later lost overboard. But thanks to the receding water levels, which had dropped by 151 feet, a fisherman, Jay Poor, was able to fish the bag out of the water after it was exposed. Upon opening the backpack, a gun fell out, prompting him to take it to the sheriff's office. The sheriff later traced the agent to the ATF and revealed the discovery. For the agent and his friend, this was a welcome surprise as it validated their story. Well, that wraps up our tour of all the crazy stuff that's been discovered when bodies of water were drained. Were you surprised by what they found at the bottom? Which one caught your attention the most? Maybe you know about another cool find in a body of water that should have made the list. If so, let us know.